Ormurith rotated beneath three pale suns, and the capital terraces shimmered with living alloy as tall figures crossed bridges spun from magnetized crystal. Vaelthera stood among them, and even there she stood apart. She was a towering giantess, her presence like a moving horizon, her beauty sharp and deliberate, as if gravity itself had sculpted her. Long silver-dark hair streamed down her back in thick luminous strands, and her features were elongated and striking. High cheekbones, wide luminous eyes, and hands vast enough to cradle transport vessels. When she moved, the air adjusted. The hall of matrons thrummed with low-frequency resonance, a sound most of her kind found comforting. Today it scraped against her nerves like static. "Your matrix remains dormant," intoned matron Usseline, her voice amplified through bioorganic conduits grown along the walls. 3 cycles without ignition. Vaelthera inclined her head. "I assure the council I have not misplaced it." A ripple passed through the chamber. A few attendants suppressed smiles, others pretended not to have heard. Humor was unbecoming when one's reproductive capacity was under review. Ormurith's civilization rested on biosynthetic lineage. Each matriarch generated heirs within towering gestation spires, children woven from genomic code and stellar plasma, stabilized by harmonic resonance between compatible genetic frequencies. Fertility was not merely biology, it was music, and Vaelthera, they believed, had forgotten her instrument. Rival matriarch Sarakinth stepped forward, her eyes gleaming. "Strength without succession is an echo fading in vacuum." "Then I shall endeavor to be very loud," Vaelthera replied gently. The council did not laugh. Beyond the hall, the city unfolded in layers of iridescent architecture, suspended transit lanes weaving between structures kilometers high. Vast atmospheric regulators shimmered above like artificial constellations. Vaelthera walked alone across a sky bridge, each step measured, careful not to disturb the smaller engineering drones flitting around her ankles like determined insects. One collided softly with her heel and recalibrated, projecting a polite apology in flickering glyphs. She bowed solemnly to it. "You at least believe I function." Her reproductive matrix had been examined by the finest bioarchitects. Quantum scans, resonance mapping, gene harmonic stimulation, nothing. No ignition cascade, no embryonic stabilization. The whispers had begun as concern. They had matured into pity. Suitors who once competed for proximity now discovered urgent diplomatic assignments in distant hemispheres. Invitations to strategic councils diminished. Even the public terraces felt wider around her, as if space itself were practicing discretion. Inside her private observatory, Vaelthera activated the planetary biosphere display. Light rippled across a holographic sphere of Ormurith, showing gestation spires glowing in steady rhythm across continents. Each pulse represented a successful resonance event. Each glow, a future secured. Her sector remained dark. She extended one immense finger and brushed the projection, distorting continents with a single touch. "You would think," she murmured, "that designing offspring from plasma would allow for margin of error." A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. An interstellar communiqué shimmered into existence, a diplomatic exchange approved by the council. A human xenobiologist would arrive within 2 rotations to study Ormurith's reproductive sciences. Vaelthera exhaled slowly. Humanity, compact, brief-lived, genetically unruly. Their DNA was said to resemble an unsorted archive. She almost smiled. Perhaps, she thought, it would be refreshing to be analyzed by someone too small to look down on her. Outside, the triple suns shifted, casting elongated shadows of the gestation spires across the capital. Within the planet's crust, energy conduits pulsed in patient cycles. Ormurith believed in harmony, in perfected lineage, in purity refined across centuries. Vaelthera gazed at the dark space on the biosphere map where her own resonance should have been and felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the silence. Not ignition, not yet, but anticipation. "If I am an anomaly," she said softly to the empty observatory. Then perhaps the universe simply has unusual taste. Far above, a distant speck pierced the upper atmosphere, trailing controlled plasma, a vessel approaching from Earth. The human vessel descended through Ormurith's upper atmosphere in a controlled arc, its hull adjusting to gravitational variables that would have crushed less stubborn engineering. By the time it settled upon the designated diplomatic platform, a semicircle of towering matriarchs awaited it, their silhouettes vast against the pale shimmer of the transit lanes. The hatch opened. Doctor. Selim Rise stepped out, boots magnetizing to the platform. He removed his helmet, blinked once at the scale of the welcoming committee, and muttered into his wrist console, "Note to self, revised definition of large delegation." Vaelthera stood at the forefront. Even among her kind she rose like an apex structure, her long, luminous hair shifting faintly with the thermals. Her gaze settled on him, not dismissive, not indulgent, curious. "Welcome to Ormurith, Dr. Rise," she said, her voice amplified through a translation lattice that rendered her tone clear rather than seismic. He craned his neck, then craned it further. "Thank you. I assume the atmospheric pressure isn't personal." A faint pause rippled through the gathered matrons. Vaelthera's eyes brightened almost imperceptibly. "It has been known to intimidate." "I left my intimidation module in my other lab coat," he replied. The council escort withdrew with restrained ceremony, leaving Vaelthera and the human upon the platform. A hovering lift adjusted itself to accommodate both of them, extending its field until Selim stood at a height level with the lower arc of her gaze. "Is this sufficient?" she asked. "For eye contact, perfect. For existential comfort, we'll see." They moved through corridors grown from living alloy, walls humming with bioelectric currents. Selim's scanner activated automatically, mapping energy signatures in cascading projections. Numbers danced across his lenses. "You are measuring me already," Vaelthera observed. "Occupational hazard. I promise not to publish anything embarrassing. I would prefer flattering charts." He glanced at the data streaming across his display. "Your cellular coherence is extraordinary. Your genome is expansive." "That is a diplomatic word." "It's a respectful one." They entered a biolaboratory chamber, where resonant spires rose like frozen lightning. Energy lattices pulsed in slow intervals, awaiting compatible harmonic input. Selim circled a projection of Vaelthera's genomic architecture, fingers flicking through layered sequences. "Your people rely on frequency stabilization for embryonic ignition," he said. "Two matrices synchronize, energy condenses, development begins." "Yes, it has functioned for centuries." "And narrowed your harmonic range with each generation." She studied him carefully. "You imply refinement is weakness. I imply over-refinement is brittle." He expanded a section of her genome, revealing dormant sequences folded within inactive strands. "These pathways aren't damaged, they're suppressed." "Suppressed by what?" "Homogeneity. You've tuned yourselves to a single melody and forgotten how to improvise." Vaelthera folded her immense hands before her. "The council believes my silence is defect." Selim shook his head. "It looks more like insulation." She considered that. "You suggest I am not incomplete, merely incompatible." "With your current gene pool, possibly, with broader variants." He smiled faintly. "That's why I'm here." A silence settled, not uncomfortable but charged. The resonant spires hummed softly around them. "You are aware," she said, "that some will consider your hypothesis contamination." "Humanity has been called worse, usually before lunch." A faint sound escaped her, brief, almost startled. Laughter restrained by centuries of composure. "You are remarkably unafraid," she noted. "I am terrified," he replied evenly. "But curiosity outranks fear, most days." He adjusted his console and projected a comparative analysis between human genomic diversity and Ormurith's current spectrum. The variance bands overlapped in unexpected intervals, forming harmonic intersections like converging waves. "There," he said quietly, "resonance potential." Valthera watched the overlapping frequencies flicker between them. For the first time in many cycles, the dark space on her internal biosensors felt less absolute. "You believe," she asked, "that my anomaly may be adaptive. I believe your ancestors anticipated stagnation." He glanced up at her towering form, and built in a safeguard. She stepped closer, careful, so as not to disrupt the instruments. Even so, the energy fields rippled faintly in response to her proximity. "If you are incorrect," she said softly, "the Council will consider this humiliation extended." "If I'm correct," he countered, "they'll have to update several textbooks." A beat passed. Ormurith does not revise doctrine easily. "Neither does Earth," he admitted, "but biology tends to win arguments." The resonance spires brightened momentarily, reacting to the proximity of their overlapping biofields. Selim's instruments chimed with subtle alerts. He stared at the readings. "Interesting." Valthera tilted her head. "Should I be concerned?" "Not unless you object to measurable fluctuations in harmonic drift." She almost smiled again. "On this world, measurable fluctuation is practically scandalous." "Then let's give them something worth whispering about." Outside the laboratory, the triple suns shifted. Within the chamber, two vastly different genetic legacies hovered on the edge of convergence, not yet synchronized, but no longer silent. The Council did not approve the trial so much as tolerate it with the enthusiasm of a star about to supervise its own eclipse. Authorization came wrapped in warnings, disclaimers, and a ceremonial statement about maintaining genomic dignity. Selim read the document twice and whispered, "On Earth we just use consent forms." Valthera stood within the central resonance chamber, her posture steady, her expression composed in that deliberate way she wore before political storms. Around her, harmonic pylons adjusted frequencies in slow calibration sweeps. Energy flowed through the planetary lattice beneath the floor, feeding into the chamber's core. "You may withdraw," she said quietly to him, not looking down but aware of him on the elevated platform beside the primary interface node. "I just traveled several light years," Selim replied. "It would be embarrassing to leave before the interesting part." Across the chamber, Matron Sarakinth observed through a semi-transparent energy veil. "If this destabilizes the lattice," she warned, "the consequences will extend beyond personal disappointment." Selim tapped his console. "No pressure, then." Valthera's lips curved faintly. "Pressure is relative." He initiated the harmonic mapping sequence. Immediately, streams of light unfolded between their biofields, hers vast and layered, his compact but astonishingly varied. The chamber translated their genomic signatures into frequency bands, projecting them in overlapping spirals. "Beginning phase alignment," Selim said. His voice remained steady, though his biosensors were already chiming at unusual readings. "Your dormant pathways are responding." "I feel that," she admitted. "Not pain, not strain, something like a long-unused muscle recalling its purpose." The pylons increased output incrementally. The air vibrated. Ormurith's planetary monitors, buried beneath continents and oceans of reactive crystal, registered a deviation from baseline resonance. Sarakinth's voice cut in. "Stability, margin decreasing." "It's fluctuating," Selim corrected, "not collapsing." Valthera closed her eyes. Within her, the silence that had defined her for cycles began to shift. Not shattered, shifted. A tremor of alignment brushed through her core, subtle but undeniable. "Human," Sarakinth said sharply, "explain that spike." Selim glanced at the data cascade. "That's not a spike, that's a handshake." "A what?" "Two systems recognizing compatibility." Valthera inhaled slowly. The harmonic projection between them intensified, threads of light weaving tighter, more coherent. Her suppressed sequences, those ancient adaptive corridors, began to unfold like archived code reactivating. Across Ormurith, gestation spires flickered in sympathetic response. Sensors transmitted alerts to the council chambers. Planetary lattice echo detected, an attendant announced. Sarakinth stiffened. Impossible. Highly possible, Selim muttered. Actually happening. The chamber brightened as the harmonic convergence reached threshold. For a fraction of a second, instability trembled at the edge of formation. Selim adjusted the variance input manually, overriding an automated dampening protocol. "You're bypassing safeguards," Sarakinth shouted. "They're suppressing the very pathways we need." Vaelthera felt the adjustment instantly. The resistance eased. The frequencies settled, not identical, not forced, but interlocking. A chord, not a single note. Then it happened. Deep within her reproductive matrix, energy condensed. Not violently, not catastrophically. It gathered, stabilized, and held. The pylons emitted a unified tone that resonated through the chamber floor and into the planetary grid. Across Ormurith, biosensors shifted from warning amber to luminous confirmation. "Embryonic matrix forming," Selim whispered, staring at the display. "Stabilization at 93%, 97. Vaelthera opened her eyes. "Is that sufficient?" 100% would be showy, he said faintly. 97 is historic. The final fluctuation settled. The embryonic energy field locked into coherence. Silence followed, not the old silence of absence. A new one stunned, recalibrating. From the observation veil, Sarakinth spoke at last. "The matrix is viable." Vaelthera did not move immediately. She was listening inward, to a presence that was not yet a voice but no longer emptiness. Selim exhaled a breath he had apparently been holding for the duration of recorded history. "Well," he said softly, "that will definitely require a revised doctrine." The planetary monitors continued to pulse confirmation across continents. The echo of the resonance event rippled through Ormurith's crust like distant thunder. Vaelthera looked down at the human scientist, impossibly small beside the magnitude of what had just occurred. "You have altered the trajectory of a civilization," she said. He blinked. "I was aiming for a successful trial run." Within her, the stabilized energy glowed steadily, not as anomaly but as continuation. Beyond the chamber, whispers were already transforming into something else: calculation, reconsideration, the uneasy reshaping of certainty. The confirmation tones did not fade quickly. For 3 planetary rotations, Ormurith's lattice repeated the same undeniable truth. Vaelthera's matrix was stable, not theoretical, not projected, active. The council convened in emergency assembly, which on Ormurith meant a great deal of dignified standing and very little admitting they had been wrong. Sarakinth spoke first. "The resonance event has altered planetary harmonic averages." Selim, seated within a scaled gravitic cradle so he could address beings the size of monuments without shouting, raised a hand. To be clear, altered in this case means prevented long-term genomic collapse. A murmur passed through the chamber. Vaelthera did not stand in the place of quiet humiliation anymore. She stood at the center dais, posture unburdened. The steady pulse within her had already synchronized with the planetary grid, not as disruption but as expansion. "For cycles," she said, her voice carrying without amplification, "we equated uniformity with strength. We narrowed our resonance spectrum until it could no longer hear variation. My silence was not absence. It was incompatibility with stagnation." One of the elder matrons inclined her head. "Our projections did indicate declining variance, though the data was politically inconvenient." Selim leaned toward his console. "Science has a habit of being inconvenient." A faint ripple of restrained amusement moved through the chamber. It was subtle, but it was new. Outside, the gestation spires had begun recalibration. Engineers worked to widen harmonic intake parameters, reopening long-archived adaptive sequences across the population. Young matrons volunteered for genomic rediversification protocols once considered radical. What had been contamination was now contingency planning. Sarakinth approached the dais. Her gaze moved from Vaelthera to the faintly glowing energy field detectable around her core. "I oppose this trial," she said. I believed purity ensured continuity. And now, Valthera asked gently, I believe survival prefers flexibility. That is a reasonable update, Selim offered. Sarakinth almost smiled. Human, your species is reckless. Historically accurate. Valthera felt the presence within her respond to her shifting emotions, not with instability but with adaptive modulation. The embryonic field strengthened when she did. It was not fragile, it was dynamic. In private, later, she stood with Selim overlooking the transit currents threading through the capital. He remained on his hovering platform, though he had finally adjusted it to a height that spared his neck. You did not fix me, she said quietly. I know. You revealed what was already there. That's usually more sustainable. She studied the planetary biosphere projection hovering between them. Where her sector had once been dark, a new frequency now pulsed outward, intersecting with others, encouraging broader harmonics. I allowed their judgment to define my worth, she admitted. For a time, I believed silence meant deficiency. Selim considered that. On Earth, we've built entire industries around misplaced deficiency. She released a soft breath that might have been laughter. Your humor is strangely stabilizing. Side effect of small size, we compensate. The Council's formal declaration arrived the next cycle. Valthera was recognized not merely as a matron in gestation, but as catalyst of renewal. The title was ceremonious, but the policy changes were tangible. Expanded interspecies research initiatives, harmonic diversity programs, open genomic exchange dialogues. Ormarith did not abandon tradition, it evolved it. As for the child forming within her, projections indicated unprecedented hybrid stability, adaptive, resilient, capable of interfacing across broader frequency ranges than any previous generation. Not a dilution of lineage, but an amplification. You realize, Selim said during one briefing, that future historians will simplify this entire event. They will, Valthera agreed. They'll say a giantess couldn't have offspring until a human arrived. She looked down at him, luminous eyes steady. Then it will be our responsibility to correct them. He smiled faintly. Good, I prefer accurate footnotes. The triple suns shifted across the horizon as Ormarith recalibrated its future. The whispers that once followed her had transformed into measured respect, not because she conformed, but because she did not. Within her, the steady harmonic pulse continued, evidence that variation was not threat but safeguard. Valthera no longer stood apart from her world. She stood ahead of it, carrying proof that difference was not shame, and that sometimes the smallest frequency shift could redirect an entire civilization. And for the record, Selim added as they watched the biosphere map expand with new resonance bands, I am absolutely getting a taller lab coat. This time, the sound that left her was unmistakably laughter, and it echoed across a world finally learning to listen.